Welcome. Today we are going to talk about the 1980s. We're going to squeeze several days into one because we're kind of out of time. But we're going to talk about kind of how the Cold War comes to an end and what kind of big Cold War stuff happens in the 1980s. Um, so, president during the 1980s is going to be this guy. His name is Ronald Reagan. Um, he's going to be a mostly successful president, very well liked during the time. He was an actor in the 50s, in the 40s and the 50s, and he was sort of moderately famous for being an actor and then became a politician. And people really liked his style. He was a funny guy. He told lots of good stories, and he had this sort of like kind grandpa vibe that people really trusted. And remember, the 70s were bad, right? A president goes down in disgrace and resigns, and the economy sucks, and the Cold War looks like we're losing. And then here comes this old guy who's really wise and smart, and he says, "Oh, everything's going to be fine." He sort of brings confidence back to America. So he's going to be very popular during the 80s. And his phrase was like, "It's morning time in America. The 1970s were the dark days, and now the sun's shining again. It's time to get up and get back to work." He wanted America to stand strong. He was a really great communicator. He was really great at talking to people and getting people to trust him. We don't have time for his video today um, because we're going to focus on his stance on communism. Is that he felt the 1970s we took too big of a step backwards and we were letting communism get away with things, and he wanted to stand up and fight back. Right? America needs to stand back up and take their place and show the Soviet Union who's boss and all this stuff. He didn't want to necessarily go to war, but he said, like, let's beef things up, let's get going. Like, we can't let the Soviet Union take over. So he's going to have a very famous moment where he goes to Berlin. Remember the city that has the wall around it? He's going to give a very famous speech where he says, "Tear down this wall," and he's fighting to end the Cold War. He says, like, it's time for America to win this thing. We're done, just tying the Soviet Union. We want to beat them. So he's going to spend a lot of money to build up the military, get us back, get more advanced technology, more in competition with the Soviet Union. And one of the big things is he's going to push for is something called the Strategic Defense Initiative, the SDI. It's got nicknamed Star Wars. And the idea behind this is that he wanted to launch satellites into space that could detect if a missile was launched, and it could shoot that missile out of the sky. Right? Um, and I'll show you what the idea is. That if the Soviets are launching nukes, the satellite could find it, and then we could launch our own missile to knock this one out of the sky. And this is a big deal because one of the reasons why neither side is launching nukes is because it takes so long for the nukes to get there that the other country has a time to launch theirs back. But with this technology, the US doesn't have to worry about the Soviet Union launching anything back. If we can knock down every missile out of the sky, then the Soviet Union can't touch us. If we can do this, we win the Cold War. We can do this and they can't. So Reagan really pushes for this, and he really sells it to everyone around the world like, yeah, we basically have this. It's not quite there yet, but we almost have it. And this is going to freak the Soviet Union out, and they're going to pour billions of dollars into making this themselves, and they can't do it. To be fair, America couldn't really do it either. Even today, 40 years later, we have this technology, sort of. It's not so good. Different missiles we're better at than others, but he definitely sort of like played it up like, oh yeah, we got this technology, it's ready to go, when reality is very early on, just barely working. But the Soviet Union is going to put billions of dollars into this, and it's going to bankrupt their country, and in a lot of ways destroy the Soviet Union, that they're going to try really hard to keep up with the US, and they won't be able to. All right, in the 1980s were an economic successful decade, making lots of money. Right as the Soviet Union is starting to collapse, America takes these huge steps forward economically, militarily, to sort of end the Cold War. All right, so some other things that are happening. The Berlin Wall is going to come down. We talked about that, how through a miscommunication, a lot of Berliners are going to show up and start tearing the wall down with their bare hands, and the communists are just going to let it happen. And this is eye-opening to the whole world. Like, oh, the communists aren't even going to fight to defend anything anymore. Right? It shows how bad things are for communist countries, that they're on the verge of collapse. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, which we talked about in the 70s, which looked bad for the US, turns out it was bad for the Soviet Union. They get dragged into this decade long war that's unwinnable. They're pouring millions of dollars, thousands of soldiers are dying, and they're not able to win. There's a lot of pressure in the Soviet Union to keep up with the US. Now that the US is doing well economically, they're putting lots of money into the military. The Soviet Union has to keep up. So they need success in Afghanistan. They need that Star Wars program. They need to build up their tanks and planes and jets, and they can't do it all. And their country's going into huge debt to try and do this, and it's on the verge of collapse. So what they decide to do to try in an effort to save the country is they're going to start reforming communism. They're going to start letting go of communism. Say, hey, communism's not working. We're going to start doing these different things. And the idea is that it's going to be this slow process. They're going to slowly open the door to capitalism. But once they open it, they lose control of everything. And everyone starts questioning, is like, well, why are we even a country anymore? Why are we doing this? And the whole thing starts to collapse. And this is the really dangerous time, because there's a lot of hardliners in the Soviet Union who've been fighting this Cold War for 40 years, and the Soviet Union's on its deathbed. And there was a lot of people who said, well, if we're going down, let's take America with us. If our country's going to collapse, so will America. There's a lot of fear that the Soviet Union, the last thing it would do before it collapses as a country, will be to launch all its nukes at the U.S. All right, so it's a really scary, dangerous time. But luckily, peace won, that the Soviet Union just slowly broke into these different countries. They all sort of went their separate ways, and none of the nukes got launched. This is a guy who was in charge of a lot of that. His name is Gorbachev. He's famous for peacefully letting go of power. And here's what the Soviet Union broke into, like 19 different countries or something, including Ukraine, which is one of the reasons why Russia and Ukraine are fighting today, is that Russia wants most of this land back. So your goal for today is to read about the fall of communism and answer some different questions.